Happy Sabbath. I hope all of you have a nice week. As we come to the end of the book of Revelation, we can clearly see that there are two different sides playing out in our earth history, the good and the evil. And many call the symbolic narrative in Revelation a tale of two cities. Why? Because Revelation uses the end-time Babylon and the New Jerusalem to tell our world's history, our world's story. And these two cities are mirror opposite of each other in several ways. How are they different? How are they contrasting to each other? First of all, Babylon, the harlot, who is committed to the beast. In contrast to New Jerusalem, the bride who is betrothed to the Lamb. And then Babylon, the harlot or prostitute, looks for pleasure and profits. And her pleasure and profits come from seducing people. And the opposite of the harlot is the bride, symbolized by the New Jerusalem. And bride denotes value that is based upon fidelity, faithfulness, self-sacrifice, and commitment. Everything the harlot is not. And New Jerusalem, or the bride, defines a self-sacrificing lifestyle. But the lifestyle of the harlot is self-centered. In the bride, the New Jerusalem has a glorious future. But Revelation shows the harlot or Babylon will descend to life that will eventually destroy itself. Last week, we talked about the New Jerusalem descending from heaven like a bride, and in it there's no more pain or suffering or death. Indicates that the old, the weak, the corrupted are no longer exist. And the new and the glorious and the perfect community begins. And the best news is that God is here too. He comes down, and the dwelling place of God is among human beings. And tonight we're going to study more about the city of New Jerusalem, starting in verse 11. It has the glory of God and a radiance like a very rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. John first observed the city from a distance, and he could see God's glory coming out from the city like a jasper stone sparkling. And this resonates with the Old Testament temple. Whenever the people see glory coming out from the temple, they know God is present. So the New Jerusalem is glorious and beautiful, and it is a result from the glory of God. In the Gospel of John, in the books of Romans and books of Revelation, we see that the current time in this world is defined as glory deficit, lacking of glory because of sin. Also, it is glory deficit because of wrong understanding and misleading portrayal of who God is. But in the holy city, there's no such misperception anymore. And the city has the glory of God. And furthermore, the city is as clear as crystal, suggesting its transparency. And this city has nothing to hide, unlike our world, which oftentimes described as lacking of transparency. And when there's no transparency, it suggests something hidden, something corrupted. In the New Jerusalem, the city is clear as crystal. and nothing is hidden. Verse 12. It has a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates are inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of the Israelites. 13. On the east, 3 gates, on the north, 3 gates, on the south, 3 gates, and on the west, 3 gates. And the wall of the city has 12 foundations, and on them are the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. In John's time, massive architecture is there to impress others about the majesty of that empire and the greatness of its ruler. And the size and the design of the city wall indicates protection and strength, and also give a sense of permanence and its distinctiveness. And people sometimes enter through gates that's huge or monumental in size. And once you get inside the city, planner of the city will impress you by the large main street that leads to their forum or their city square. Example of impressive structure we can find in Rome is the work of Caesar Augustus. He transformed the city wall of Rome from brick to marble, and his famous saying is, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble." And John took some of these ideals so his early readers would understand the scope of the story, of how grand and marvelous is God's city. And John did more to these ideals. He magnified them and transformed them so that God's city reflects a different kind of power structure than anything human can imagine. Verse 12 said, New Jerusalem gates are inscribed with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And verse 14 said, the 12 foundation of the city have the names of the 12 apostles of Jesus inscribed on them. In John's time, wealthy patrons who donates money to build these massive structures often dedicate that project to those who are in power, and they would carve their names on it. For example, in Ephesus, some wealthy patron put up a monumental gate beside the marketplace with the inscription of Caesar Augustus and his family on it. And outside of Ephesus, a patron put up a new aqueduct, and the inscription marked the local goddess of Artemis, Caesar Augustus, and Tiberius. John's early reader understand what these inscriptions stand for, which is to aggrandize the gods and the rulers' power and glory. But in the New Jerusalem, these inscriptions serve as a story that is different from the earthly empires and a different kind of power compared to the gods of the earth. The inscription of the apostles and the 12 tribes indicate this God, the true God of love. Instead of putting his own name, which he well deserved, on these structures, he remembers the story of his people from the beginning until the end. The New Jerusalem, John, is surrounded by a high wall with 12 gates. 3 gates on each of the 4 sides with angels by them. The wall and the gates in Jerusalem repeats the description of temple in Ezekiel's vision. If you're interested, you can look into Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 5, and Ezekiel 48, verse 30 to 35. The gates on each side, the north, the south, the east, the west, allow entry from any direction. And this means the city is accessible or reachable for all mankind. And Jesus foretold that many will come from the east, many will come from the west, the north, the south, and sit at the table in God's kingdom. That is in Luke 13, verse 29. Well, Jesus' prediction is fulfilled in the New Jerusalem, where everybody has unlimited access to God's presence. And this picture that we see here is unlike the popular portrayal of St. Peter sitting at the closed, shut, pearly gate of heaven, checking those who tries to enter. These gates are opened and not shut, according to verse 25. That means they are not there to keep people out, but to invite people in, because the New Jerusalem is where God wants people to be. Now verse 15 and 16. The angel who talked to me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and walls. The city lies foursquare, its length and the same as its width, and the measure the city with his rod 1,500 miles, or the Greek measurement is 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. This reminds us of a cube, isn't it? Well, the measurement of New Jerusalem is a perfect cube. The city is actually, according to Greek measurement, like I just mentioned, is 12,000 stadia, or 1,500 miles, our kind of measurement. And it is the same in length, width, and height. The cube generally consists of 12 edges, if you look and count. Each edge is 12,000 stadia long, which total up to 144,000 stadia of Greek measurement for the entire city. And if you recall, in Revelation chapter 7, verse 4, shows that 144,000 is the number of the totality of God's people. And the New Jerusalem is a huge city, large enough to accommodate all of God's people, all who ever lived on the earth. The significance of the New Jerusalem's cube shape is found in the fact that the Holy of Holies, which is the most holy place in the Old Testament temple, or Solomon's temple, was also a perfect cube. Let me read to you 1 Kings 6:20. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, 20 high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold, and he also overlaid the altar of cedar. So we could see the Temple of Solomon, the most holy place, is also 20 by 20 by 20, also a cube size. But whereas the one in New Jerusalem is much bigger, 150 miles, height, width, and length. So the city functioned not only as the temple, but also as the Holy of Holies. In the earthly temple, the Holy of Holies contained of the Ark of the Covenant, which also represented God's throne. So the throne of God and the Lamb now in the New Jerusalem is located in the city. And Jeremiah prophesied that in the Messianic age, people would not talk about the Ark of the Covenant because Jerusalem would be called the throne of the Lord. This is in Jeremiah 3, verse 16 to 17, and it is being fulfilled here. In the earthly temple, only the high priest was allowed to enter the Holy of Holies to meet God there. But in the New Jerusalem, this privilege is granted to all the redeemed. As you can see it in verse 3 and 4 of chapter 22 later. And earlier in Revelation chapter 7, verse 15, it says, they are before the throne of God, which is God's people. They are before the throne of God and serve him in worship day and night in his temple. And the one sitting on the throne will tabernacle over them. Now verse 17. The angel measured the wall using human measurement, and it was 144 cubits thick. And 1 cubit is approximately 18 inches. So 144 cubits thick is about 260 feet or 66 meters. Wow. Generally, a wall is constructed to provide security or privacy, and most wall is only about 1 foot or a little bit more thick. And the massive size of these walls not only implies strength, but it also suggests proportionately how massive is the city. In the Old Testament, when Nehemiah heard that Jerusalem's wall were broken down, he became distraught and overtook the task of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And we remember that it's in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, which we had studied a few quarters earlier. And even with the threat of enemy, Nehemiah was not deterred from the building effort. And he wanted Jerusalem to be secure. And it was common for watchmen to be posted on city wall in order to detect the approaching enemy and sound an alarm. And here the New Jerusalem's extremely thick wall emphasized the city's security, and the absence of watchmen on the wall emphasized the fact that God is there. God is a protector. No need any watchmen. Verse 18. The wall is built of jasper, while the city is pure gold, clear as glass. As John comes closer, he noticed that the city walls are made of jasper and transparent gold. And this accentuates the splendor of the city. And this is like the description of the temple in Jerusalem by Josephus, the historian, talking about the old temple in the old Jerusalem. So according to this Jewish historian, the temple was covered by plates of gold. He said, and at the first rising of the sun, reflected back a very fiery splendor and made those who forced themselves to look upon it to turn their eyes away, just as they would have done at the sun's own rays. So the old temple in old Jerusalem, when the sun shines on the temple, it reflects the ray and people's eye has to look away from it. Verse 19 and 20. The foundation of the wall of the city are adorned with every jewel. The first was jasper, the second is sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, and the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The New Jerusalem has 12 foundations. Usually, most building, even high-rise, only have one foundation, and the New Jerusalem has 12 foundations and decorated with precious stones. And besides the stones, verse 14 said the 12 foundation has the name of the 12 apostles engraved on them. These precious stones parallel the precious stones that decorated the high priest's breastplate in the Old Testament. And on the priest's breastplate, the names of the 12 tribes of Israel were engraved. So these precious stones and the names inscribed on the foundation represent God's people of the Old Testament, which is the 12 tribes, and also God's people of the New Testament, the 12 apostles. Combining 12 tribes and the 12 apostles show that the city is a place for all God's people from both Old Testament and New Testament. Verse 21. And the 12 gates are 12 pearls. Each of the gates is a single pearl, and the street of the city is pure gold, transparent as glass. The gates of the New Jerusalem are made of huge pearl. Upon them are inscribed the name of the 12 tribes of Israel, as in Ezekiel's vision and also in verse 12. As John moves inside the city, he sees a street made of pure gold, like transparent glass. John is trying to say that if an ordinary city could boast of its gates and its streets, which are made of stones, New Jerusalem has gates with pearls and streets paved with gold. And furthermore, this description is similar to Josephus' description, which I mentioned, of the second temple, or Herod's temple, that the temple shines at the rising of the sun, that one has to look away. So it is magnifying the old temple and the old Jerusalem. Verse 22. I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. John said that he saw no temple in New Jerusalem, for its temple is the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. And for ancient reader, it would have been inconceivable that the ideal city has no temple building. For Jews, Greeks, and Romans alike, a temple was essential life in the city. For example, Ephesus was famous for its temple to the goddess Artemis, and that building was so impressive that it was one of the ancient world's wonder. And the people of Ephesus put a picture of the temple on their coins as a sign of their identity. And the temple had massive columns along its perimeters, and it was so large that you could put an entire football field inside, historians said, and even with more room to spare. And the coin displayed a large statue of Artemis, who was worshipped there. And then other cities also have impressive temples. Pergamus had the famous temple of Augustus, also on its coins. And you can see in the coin Augustus being crowned with victory wreath in the temple. And temple was also very important to the Jews. Israel has only one temple because there's only one God, they believe. And the temple was located in Jerusalem. And the tragedy was the temple was destroyed by the Romans 70 AD. And that was part of Romans' effort to suppress the revolt of the Jews. And the Roman victory was so significant that the Roman portrayed on the Arch of Titus beside the Roman Forum. And the arch shows that Roman troops carrying away the booty they had seized from the temple. And the most obvious item you could see is a Jewish menorah from the temple, which the Roman soldiers are carrying on the shoulder as a sign of the victory. So with this background of history, we might expect John to promise that in the New Jerusalem, there'll be a new temple. There'll be a new temple that's so glorious. So the idea behind temple is that it is a place set apart for God. But in the New Jerusalem, there's no longer any barrier between God and human beings. For people to worship in the temple is simply to worship in the presence of God and Christ, who created and redeemed human race. So from this perspective, we can see that in New Jerusalem, the relationship of God and humanity has been made whole, that there's no more barrier between God and man. Verse 23 and 24 and 25. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nation will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring the glory into it. Its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. So John noticed that in the city there's no need of light from the sun or moon, because the glory of God provides light for its residents. Therefore, there's no night in the city. Here is the fulfillment of another Isaiah's prophecy regarding the glorified Zion recorded in Isaiah 60 verse 19 to 20. Here I read. No longer will you have the sun for light by day, nor by brightness will the moon give you light. But you will have the Lord for an everlasting light, and your God for your glory. Your sun will no longer set, nor will your moon wane, for you will have the Lord for an everlasting light. Now let's go to verse 26. People will bring into the glory and the honor of the nations. This verse is similar to verse 24. Verse 24 said, the nations will walk by its light, and the king of the earth will bring the glory into it. So an unknown SDA author interpreted these verses as the activities of the residents of the New Jerusalem, suggests they will not be idle or have nothing to do. And he quoted the book of Great Controversy. It says, immortal minds will contemplate with never-failing delight the wonders of creative power, the mysteries of redeeming love. There will be no cruel, deceiving foe to tempt to forgetfulness of God. And every faculty will be developed, every capacity increased. The acquirement of knowledge will not weary the mind or exhaust the energies. There, the grandest enterprises may be carried forward, the loftiest aspiration reached, the highest ambitions realized. And still there will arise new heights to surmount, new wonders to admire, new truths to comprehend, fresh objects to call forth the powers of mind and soul and body. All the treasures of the universe will be open to the study of God's redeemed. What it is saying is that besides there will be continuing learning, there will also be continual achievements to attain. And the honor and the glory will be acknowledged and displayed before the hosts of the saved in the New Jerusalem. But instead of man being exalted, the credit and praise will rightly be rendered to God. The final verse, 27. But nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who practices abomination or falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. what will not enter this new community are the things that brought turmoil and suffering in the first place. Conclusion. In this chapter, the imagery is fanciful and even bizarre at times. And Professor Craig Castor said, the purpose is to push the human imagination to its limit and then beyond. John is trying to convey that God's city cannot be equated to any earthly city. And John is deeply aware that every society on earth is limited and extremely flawed. And to him, every purpose of God and the power of God are always beyond those of human beings. Rome was called the eternal city at John's time. But John says it is not, that he knows the political order of the time cannot be equated with God's everlasting order. And for John, the vision of New Jerusalem is not about human-like in pretensions and display, but it is pointing to the perfect purpose of God being fulfilled. And another scholar, Dr. C. Tonstead, says something that worth our deep thoughts. And he said, among the New Testament books, Revelation is one of the books that most extensively change what the Christian traditionally believed. The end of the journey is earth and not heaven. The movement at the very end goes from heaven to earth. First, the holy city comes down, and God too comes down to the earth. That is in verse 1 and 4 of chapter 21. And the vision of the new earth is not about its richness and splendor that we're familiar with in our worldly perspective. It is symbolic and filled with expressions reflecting the nature of God. Dr. Tonstead invites us to think deeply, which is greater, human beings going up to heaven or God coming down to earth? Beautiful, isn't it? Happy Sabbath. And next week, we are going to study the final chapter of Revelation, chapter 22.